It's a rare condition this day and age to read any good news on the newspaper page. And love and tradition of the grand design, some people say, is even harder to find. Well, then there must be some magic clue inside these gentle walls. 'Cause all I see is a tower of dreams, real love bursting out of every scene.
My name is Alea Smith, and we are attributing Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. of how he changed the world with the Civil Rights Movement. The Selma March was a march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama to demand the right to vote for black people. Dr. King arrived at Selma to gather people to march to the Selma courthouse to gain access to vote. The peaceful march was no longer peaceful. Everyone was sent to jail. While King was in jail, someone issued a night march. Jimmy Lee Jackson was murdered in the night march. Jackson's death sparked an idea in Dr. King. The next move was to march from Selma, Alabama to Montgomery, Alabama to demand the right to vote. The very first march was called the Bloody Sunday on March 7, 1965. About 525 blacks left Brown Chapel and walked 6 blocks across the Pitts Bridge and the Alabama River. They were stopped by the white troops. It's called the Bloody Sunday because each person was suffering from fractures of ribs, heads, arms, and legs caused by the white troops. The Bloody Sunday was televised. This caused whites and clerks to join the march. The second march King led. It was on March 9th. The troops let them pass. King thought that was strange, so he kneeled to the ground and prayed to God. He got back up and turned around and left. He knew something did not feel right. That same day, a white priest was killed by white troops. This caused King to take the march to court to be passed. On March 20th, President Johnson approved of the march and made the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The final march was on March 21st through 25th. About 3,200 people marched that day. Each day, they walked 12 miles.
With all the recent and violent attacks happening in Birmingham, Alabama, activist A. Philip Randolph and Martin Luther King Jr. came together to create one big cause and march. Randolph's aide, Bayard Rustin, combined the two groups, the Southern Christian League and the African American Equal Job Opportunity, to come together and march a big protest on the Capitol. President John F. Kennedy at the time was very concerned that this would be one of the most violent marches in history, but they reassured him that their protests are always going to be anti-violence. The historic march was on August 28th, 1963. About 250 to 300,000 people. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech became a pinnacle for the civil rights, but it wasn't planned that way. As this last speaker, he diverted from his 4-minute speech and made it into a 16-minute speech. He'd given the speech before in Kentucky, but as he was talking, he just sort of went off on this very in-depth, emotionally charged speech, and the gospel singer who had performed earlier that night, Mahalia Jackson, she was standing right behind Martin, and she said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." As one of the largest demonstrations in the world, and one of the first to be televised, it's considered to be one of the greatest historical moments in history and in the world. So
Martin Luther King was a great man of courage, tenacity, and love. Because of his kind acts, we can now stand up as a people and unite, apart from the color of our skin, apart from being segregated by racial tendencies. Martin Luther King taught us how to love ourselves despite what anybody else think of us, and he taught us to always dream and stand up for what you believe in. Because of his actions, I can teach my children to not care about what others think and don't allow others to define and separate you and place you in a category because of the color of your skin. I can teach my children to love every individual despite the color of their skin and to display love and not hate. Martin Luther King, we thank you and we tribute this video to you, and we appreciate all that you have done. You are indeed an inspiration.